All right, now we are done with the sign up form. We've created the form, and then we are done with the data validation on the client side. So next, now we need to process our form on the server side and ultimately create our account, create our user account, and save it in the database. But before we can do all that, we need to put some few things in place, and one of those few things is to set up our database. And just like I said, we'll be using a Postgres database, okay? And you know Postgres is a relational database, so we need to create our database and we need to create our tables, okay? So ultimately we'll be needing 3 tables, okay? We need user tables, table that will be storing our user data, and then we need another table to store our email verifications, where we'll be storing the verification mail, the token. We'll be creating token. We'll be assigning the token to the user email. So we'll be having another separate table to store the email verifications, every details that is relating to the email verifications, and we'll be having another table to store password reset. So anytime our user forgets their password, we have another table to store all the details that will be sending to the user to reset their password. All right, so first off, now we need to create our database. All right, so in this video I'll be using the pg admin, let me call it 2 now. So this is what I'll use to create my database, but this is just to create the database. You can use any database management tool you are conversant with, but for now I'll be using a pg admin. Okay, if you don't have a Postgres database set up on your PC, I have a video on that. I'll be dropping the link in the description, so you can just grab the link and go through the video to set up a Postgres database on your PC, either Windows or Mac. All right, so the video is going to direct you on how to go about all that. All right, so here now I'm going to start up my database server now, and then I'm going to create a database. All right, we are not going to be using this authentication system. I have this one you are seeing now is what I used to for testing our database. Right, I'm trying to see if I can zoom it in. I'm not able to zoom it. Okay, yeah, I'm able to zoom it in now. Okay, so we are going to create a database. All right, we are going to call it authentication flow. Authentication flow. Okay, so that's going to be the name of our database, and that's all we need to provide here. Okay, so now we have our database. All right, now this is what we'll be connecting. This is the database we'll be connecting with from our app. All right, this is the one I use for during our testing. Okay, but we'll be using this authentication flow now. All right, so now we're going to go to our app. We need to create a migration file. Okay, so this is why we install the pg-migrate package. If we go to our package.json I showed you in the beginning of this project, okay, so we have a pg-migrate. Where is it? It should be in dev dependencies. Okay, so we have node-pg-migrate. So we'll be using this library to create all our tables, to run all our database migrations. All right, I'm going to close this now. Okay, so to create a migration file, let me see if I can clear my terminal. All right, okay, so to use that package to create your migration file, you are going to run this command npm run migrate, and then you are going to have the create command, okay, and then the name of your migration file. So we are going to call this first migration. Okay, that is going to be the name of our migration file. By running this command now, this is going to create a migrations folder in our project. Okay, so this is the folder that this command created, and inside of that migrations folder you are going to have your migration file with the name that we provided. You know, we provided first migration. Okay, so that is the name. These numbers you are looking at, it's a timestamp of when we created the migration file. All right, I'm going to put this back in its place. Okay, and then I'm going to close my terminal. All right, so now we are inside of the migration file. Okay, let me close all this. We don't need them for now. Okay, so the migration file consists of two sections. We have the up section, which is where you'll be putting the SQL queries for setting up your database, and this down part is used to revert whatever operation you did in the up part. Okay, that's one of the benefits of using migration. Right, you can easily revert whatever you do in your database, and it has some inbuilt database management. So any migration you perform, it doesn't perform it twice. Even if you run the command, if you run the migration file a million times, any migration that has been performed will not be redo. Okay, so now we are going to be creating a database. We are going to use pgm.sql. All right, so I'm going to have a template literals. Okay, so inside of this place will be writing our query. So the first thing we are going to create is we are going to create a custom type, create type, and then we're going to call it user role. Okay, so it's going to be an enum, so an enumerated custom type enum. Okay, and then our user role can either be admin or user. All right, okay, it's going to be a semicolon, right? And then we're going to create another custom type. Then we're going to call it auth provider. So this is going to be an enum of all our auth providers. Okay, so the first one we'll be having is going to be local. So we'll be using local to stand for our email and password auth method, right? And then we are going to have Google for Google OAuth method, and then we are going to have our GitHub for our GitHub OAuth method. All right, if you want to use other OAuth methods, OAuth providers, maybe Facebook, maybe LinkedIn, maybe Discord, so you can add them as part of the enum members. All right, this one is this local, we are using it to stand in for the email and password authentication method. Right, so after creating a custom type, we're going to be creating a users table. Okay, I'm going to come here now. Right, so we're going to have create table. This is where we're going to be storing our users table. Okay, so I'm going to say if not exist. Okay, and then the name of our table is going to be users. All right, I'm going to have this. Okay, I'm going to have a semicolon. All right, so the first column in our table is going to be ID. So our ID is going to be serial, and then it's going to be our primary key. Okay, and then we are going to have another column. It's going to be public ID. We won't be using this column in this project, but just in case you want to create something like this in your personal project, okay, so we have a public ID, which is the ID we assuming there is a need to pass our user identity onto the client, so we'll be using the public ID for that. All right, okay, this is going to be unique. This public ID is going to be unique. Okay, going to be 100. Okay, and then a user must have a name. If next we're going to have email, right? And email is also going to be variable character. Okay, and email is going to be unique. All right, there should be only one email per user, and then not null. Okay, so after that we're going to have role. This role is going to be of data type user role, which is the custom type we created at this point. All right, and the default value is going to be user. Okay, so by default every user created is going to be user. Okay, and then we're going to have another column which is going to be auth providers. Auth providers is going to be an array of this custom type auth provider. Okay, because a single user can have multiple sign-in methods. Okay, there is possible that our user can have email and password authentication method, and the same user can also use Google to sign into their account. So we'll be having an array that is going to be storing all the method that each user can use to sign in into their account. So the default value for this is going to be an empty array. Okay, that is the syntax for array in Postgres database. Okay, and then we have a GitHub ID, which is going to be the ID from GitHub for every user that is signing in with GitHub. Okay, GitHub ID is going to be unique. Same for Google ID. Okay, so we'll be getting all this from Google and GitHub as the case may be. All right, and this is also going to be unique. Okay, the next is going to be our password hash. All right, so we'll be hashing the password that the user is going to be using to set up the account. We will not be storing the password as plain text, so we are going to be storing that in that column. Okay, and then the next is we're going to be having a column to store if our user email has been verified. Okay, so that is going to be of data type Boolean. All right, and then we're going to have a created at column to store when a user created their account. It's going to be of data type timestamp with time zone. Okay, and then the default value is going to be current time stamp. All right, so the last column of this table is going to be updated at. All right, we are going to use that to track anytime the last time that the user make changes to their account. All right, current timestamp. Okay, that's not going to have any comma. Now we are done with the users table. Okay, so after the users table, we're going to create an index for this auth providers column, because we'll be using the column for querying our user. Okay, so we're going to create an index for that column. All right, so create index. The name of the index is going to be users auth providers. It's going to be IDX for index. So on users, okay, using GIN, that is generalized inverted index, because our auth providers column is an array column. Okay, and after creating the index, we'll be adding a custom check to our table. Okay, so this is going to be alter table. Okay, and then the table is going to be users. So we want to add a custom check. We should add constraint. All right, constraint. Okay, the name of our constraint is going to be check password hash local. All right, the need for this custom check is going to be to check anytime a user is creating an account with email or password, which is going to be the local auth method. Okay, so we are going to ensure that the user provides their password. So we are going to have a check. Okay, we're going to have a check, and inside of the check, we're going to have a not to negate this statement. So if our user is using the local auth method, so I'm going to say if local equals, and we have ending. Inside of the ending, I'm going to have our auth providers. So, okay, so it's either the user does not have local auth method, but if the user has local auth method, then the user must the password hash column must be filled. So we're going to have password hash. Okay, then is not null. All right, it's not null. Okay, so what this statement is saying now is the user should not have a local authentication method, but if the user has a local authentication method, then the password hash column should not be null. There should be value in that column. By default, the column is going to be null, but anytime the user is having a local auth method, then the password hash column should not be null. All right, okay, and then next, now we're going to be creating our email verifications table. All right, so we are going to have create table if not exist. All right, Then the name of our table is going to be email verifications. I'm going to drag this down and close my query. Okay, and then the first column is going to be user ID. Okay, and then it's going to be integer. Okay, it's going to be a primary key. Okay, and then it's going to be referencing. We have reference. It's going to be referencing the users table on the ID column. Okay, we're going to have on delete cascade. So anytime the user account is deleted, any email verifications that is attached to them should also be deleted alongside. All right. And then next is we have the email colon. Okay, that is going to be the email of the user. Right, it's going to be unique and then not null. Okay, so we have a token. This is going to be the verification token of the user. Let's say 255. It's actually not going to be up to that, but we're just going to use that as our validation. Okay, we're going to have an expires at column, which is going to be the timestamp of when the verification email is going to expire. So timestamp with time zone. All right, and then it should not be null. Okay, it should be provided always. So the last column for this table is going to be the created at column, which is going to be timestamp to track when the entry was created in our table. Okay, so this is going to be current timestamp. Okay, that's going to be the end of that table. All right, the last table will be creating is going to be for our password reset. So we're going to have create table if not exist. Okay, and the name of our table is going to be password reset. Okay, I'm going to open this. Right, I'm going to close the query at that point. Okay, so the colon is going to be user ID. Okay, and then it's also going to be integer. All right, integer. Okay, it's going to be a primary key. Then it's going to be referencing the user table references. Then we have a users referencing the ID column. Okay, so we have on delete cascade. Okay, so after that, we're going to have a token column that is going to be storing the password reset, the reset token. All right, then this is going to be unique and it must always be provided. Okay, we also have expires at and created that. So I'm just going to copy from this and paste here. Okay, so that's that for that. Now, before we round up this part, we need to create a trigger function that is always going to be updating this updated at column. By default, Postgres does not have any inbuilt functionality to update our updated at column. Okay, so anytime a user makes a changes to their account, we are going to be creating a trigger function that is going to be updating this column to the current time at which the user is making the changes to their account. Okay, so the first thing we are going to do is we're going to create the trigger function and then we are going to be creating the trigger itself. Okay, so to start with, we're going to create a trigger function, create or replace function. All right, so the name of the function is going to be set updated at. Okay, so that's going to be a function and the function is going to be returning a trigger type. All right, so limit that to $$ to start with. Okay, so the new data the new entry that is about to be created, I'm going to set the updated at column to current timestamp. All right, timestamp. Okay, and then we're going to be returning the new entry. Okay, so that's at that point we're going to end the function. So we have a $, and then we are going to have language is going to be PL PG SQL as a procedural language. Now, lastly, we're going to be creating the trigger itself. This is the function that the trigger is going to be executing. Now we are going to be creating the trigger and attaching it to the users table. Okay, so create trigger. So we're going to call the name of the trigger update timestamp or write timestamp. Okay, so we're going to say when this is when the trigger is going to be triggered. So before updating users table. Okay, so for each row, we want to execute the trigger function. Okay, execute function. The name of the function is set updated, the function we just created before now. All right, so I'm going to close the query. So this is all the SQL queries we'll be running to create our tables, all the tables we'll be needing for this project. Okay, and now at the down part of the migration file, we need to write some queries that are going to reverse all the operations we did in the up part. So we are going to go to the down part. Okay, so inside of this, we are going to have pgm.sql. Okay, going to have my template literals. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be dropping the trigger and the function that we created at this part. Okay, that's the first thing we're going to be doing. Okay, so we're going to say drop trigger if the trigger exists. Okay, and then the name of the trigger is update. What's the name? Update timestamp. Okay, so we have a update timestamp. Okay, on users table. Okay, and then the next is we're going to be dropping the trigger function. So drop function if the function exists, and the name of the function is, what's the name? Set updated at. Okay, all right, so now we've dropped the trigger and the function. So next is we are going to be dropping the tables. All right, we're going to have a drop. We are first going to drop table if the table exists. We are first going to drop the password reset table. Okay, the next table we are going to be dropping drop table if exists. It's going to be the email verifications table. All right, and then the last table will be dropping is going to be the user table if exists. Okay, going to be users. All right, so we've dropped the trigger, the function, and the tables. Now the last is our custom types that we created. Okay, so we are going to come and are going to say drop, all right, type if the type exists, and the type is auth provider. All right, and then the second type is that is user role. Okay, so that's all for our migration file. So up next now is we are going to be running this migration file, but just before we run it, I'm just going to copy the finalized query now and paste it. Yeah, it's the same thing, but there's the possibility that I might have omitted a comma somewhere or a semicolon somewhere, so I don't want us to run into the possibility of debugging. So I'm just going to copy the tested query that I have there, then I'm going to paste it here. It's the same thing. Don't be upset about that. It's actually the same thing. All right, but just to avoid the possibility of running into any issue, so that we save ourselves some time. Right, this is a comment. Just like you can use double / to create a comment in your JavaScript, in SQL you use double hyphen to create a comment. So this is a comment, this is a comment. All right, you can see that what we have is essentially what we typed out the other time. All right, so this is also a comment. Okay, and we can just leave this as it is. This is simple enough. We have a semicolon, semicolon, right? So this is actually good on its own. Okay, now we need to run a migration file. But before we are going to run our migration file, we need to set up our environment variables, which is where we are going to be providing the details of the database that we set up at this point. Okay, so if you go to your file explorer, I added the file to the starter file, which is .env.example. If you open that file, I'm going to be seeing some envs there. Okay, so all the envs, environment variables we'll be using for this project, you have the name inside of that file. Okay, so you can just copy all that, and then we're going to create an .env file, the actual file. Okay, this is just an example to show you the environment variables we'll be using for this project. Okay, so for our database, these are all the env variables that we need for our database. So I'm just going to copy this alongside this base URL. Okay, I'm going to copy that. We don't need this base URL for now, but let's just copy it at once. Okay, let me copy that. All right, and then we are going to create .env file. Okay, it's going to be in the root directory. Okay, so we are going to have .env. all right, then I'm going to paste that here. For now, our project is running on HTTP. We've not gotten to where we are going to change it to HTTPS. So for now, let's leave it at HTTP. Okay, we can get rid of this comment. All right, or let me just leave it there. Okay, so this is going to be the host of our database, which is localhost. If you are running a local instance of Postgres database, if you are running a remote instance, possibly you have a database remotely, you're going to provide your host there. Your provider is going to provide that for you. Okay, if you want to get all these details for your local database, you can come here. All right, you right click on your database and you go to properties. Okay, so this is the name of the database. All right, definition. Okay, let's go to parameters, security. Okay, I think what we needed is not here. Okay, this is actually what we needed. Okay, so you right click on the server itself, not on the database now. On the server, you right click on it, and then you come to properties. Okay, so this is what we need. This is our host, local host, because we are running a local instance. So if your own is different, just use what you have there. This is going to be our port, and this is our username. Okay, we also need the database name, which is the name of our database. All right, and a password, the password that you set up when you were installing the Postgres database. Okay, so we are going to go here. Our host is localhost, as we saw here. I'm going to reopen this. Okay, so this is our host and this is our port. So I'm going to copy that 5432. Okay, so we need to create the port variable. So we have our db port. Okay, so I'm going to paste that. Okay, the user is, that's the username, which is the same as Postgres. If you are using Mac, there is the possibility that your username might be different, but for Windows, it's most likely this. Just use whatever you find here. Okay, so our username is also going to be Postgres. Okay, the name of our database is Authentication flow. That's this. If you click on properties, so this is the name of our database. All right, that's the name. Okay, I'm going to paste that here, and the password, that is the password you set up when you are installing the local instance of your database. So my password was just password. Okay, that one doesn't have so much difference. Okay, so we've set up all our variables for our database now. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run our migration file. Okay, so to run this migration file, we are going to create another file inside of this lib file. Okay, so we are going to call the name of the file run migration. Should we add an S? Okay, let's just leave it like that. Okay, so the first thing we'll be importing this file is the server only package, because we don't want this to be executed on the client side, and we don't want it to also be bundled as part of the client module. Okay, so we are going to be getting all of our database parameters. So the first is going to be our database host. Okay, so we have our DB host. Okay, so we are going to get it from process.env. All right, and then we have our DB host. Okay, so the next is going to be the user. Okay, so we have a user. Okay, that is going to be the name of our user, the username of our database. So we have our process.env.db user. Okay, the next is going to be the password. Okay, so now I'm going to close my sidebar. Now let's check if our values are all provided, just in case you forget. Possibly when you are hosting your app, you might forget to provide your environment variables. Okay, so we're going to create a checker, okay, just to ensure that we do not forget pass. Okay, and there vision, if not written name. Okay, and vision again, no, it's import db ports. All right, so if any of this is undefined, okay, then we are going to throw an error here. So throw new error, and we are going to say invalid database credentials. All right, let me save that. Now we are actually going to run a migration file now. Okay, but before we run that, let's create a variable for a migration directory. We are going to be needing a part of our migration directory. This migration directory, okay, we need the path to this, right? So we're going to call the name of the variable, let's say migration, what should we call it? Migration path. Okay, or let's call it migration dir for directory. Okay, so to get that, we're going to have path dot join. Let me import path. Okay, dot join. Okay, and then we're going to have process dot cwd for current working directory. Okay, and then we are going to join it with the migrations folder. I want to believe it's actually migrations. Okay, so that is going to create the migration directory path for us. All right, now we need to create a function, a sync function. Okay, so the name is going to be, let's call it run migrations. Okay, no parameter is needed, so let's have a statement here to know that our migration is running. I'm going to say running db migrations. Okay, and after that I'm going to have an asynchronous operation that we're going to await here. Okay, so we need to import the migrate package. All right, let this be at the top of our file. I'm going to create. Okay, so here I'm going to import migrate from, so we have a node-pg-migrate. Okay, so we're going to invoke this, and then we're going to pass an object as the argument. The first property of the object is going to be the migration directory path that we created earlier. Okay, and then for a start, we are going to be using the hop direction. Okay, if we want to revert any migration, then you are going to provide down here. Okay, so this hop is for running all the code, all this query in the hop part of your migration. Okay, so here I'm going to have a log this is just going to be an empty arrow function. Okay, we don't need this for anything. Okay, this is going to be an equal part. All right, and this is going to be no lock, no log. Okay, so this is going to be true. All right, and then the migrations table, which is what the package is going to be using to track all the migration that has been executed against our database. All right, so any migration that has already been executed is going to first check before re-executing that migration. So any migration that has been executed will not be re-executed anymore. Okay, unless you reverse the operation of that migration. Okay, so we have our database URL, which is where we'll be providing our database credentials. So this is going to be our DB host. Okay, we have our DB host. The next is going to be the user. All right, this is going to be DB user. Okay, we have our password. Okay, and it's going to be DB password. All right, and then the name of our database. Okay, that is our authentication flow. All right, and then after that, port. Okay, port is going to be DB port. All right, and then lastly SSL. Okay, so this one, it's going to be that true or false. When it is in production, we have process.env. Okay, so when we're in production, we're going to make this true production. Okay, so SSL is going to be true in production, but in development, we're going to make it false. So this is going to be then. But if you're in production, if the database provider you'll be using in production does not require SSL, then you can as well just leave it out entirely. Okay, there's a problem there. Type string or undefined is not unable to type number. Okay, from our env we'll be getting the port as a string, so we need to convert it to number. So I'm just going to wrap this in the number constructor function. Okay, so that's going to convert that to number. Now we need to call our function. Okay, so we are good to go now. But just so that this file will be executed, because it is just a standalone file now, right? Let's import it into our project so that the file will actually be executed. Okay, so we are going to go to layout. That is the root of our project. I think layout is already open somewhere here. Okay, so we're going to import that file. If we don't import it, then nothing will happen because it is currently standalone. Okay, so we're going to go to library, and inside of library we have our run migration file. Okay, so let's save that, and now let's start at dev server. Okay, so we have npm run dev. Okay, it hasn't executed yet. By the time I refresh this page, it's going to execute. Like just before that, let me make a simple changes here so that we know that this migration is actually successful. Okay, so I'm going to come after this, then I'm going to have another statement here, also .log. Okay, so that we know if it is successful or not. Right, then I'm going to have the database migration successful. Right, we can make these migrations. Okay, let me save that. Okay, now let me refresh this page. Okay, so now you can see running DB migrations. All right, so database migrations successful. So that means all the queries that we have here have been successfully executed. Now let's check our database and see if it has actually been executed. Okay, so let's refresh our database. Refresh. Okay, so now let's go to schemas. Okay, in public we are going to see tables. Okay, so so you can see we have all our tables there. We have the email verifications table, we have the password reset table, and we have the users table. This PG migrations table, that is the table we specified. Let me close this. In our run migration file, that is the name that we specified there. Okay, it is this table. If you open the, where is it, PG migrations, if you open the table now, okay, so you are going to see the details of the migrations that we've executed. Okay, so you can see now this is the name of the only migration file that we have in our project. Okay, so it is this table that the package is using to track which of the migrations has been executed. If you revert the migration, if you come here and let's change this to down. Okay, so if you revert the migration, and let me save this, let's see. I don't actually know if, okay, it has been executed. So let's recheck our database. We can refresh this. Okay, so you can see now that the entry has been deleted. This is because the migration has been reverted. If you go back to your table, okay, let's refresh our database. Okay, I'm going to refresh that. So if you check tables, you can see now that we don't have users table, we don't have password reset, we don't have email verifications. Okay, so the migration has been reverted. Okay, that's why there is no entry in the PG migrations table. Okay, so no entry there. But if we rerun the migration now, so let's change this to up. I'm going to save that. Okay, so the migration has been run successfully. So if we refresh this again, so now you can see that we have an entry which is telling us that the migration has been executed. If we refresh our database again, I'm going to refresh this. Now let's go to our schemas and our tables. Okay, so you can see now that we have our tables back. All right, so that's all for this video. The next video are going to be looking at some other things that we need to put in place before we create our user account. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.